Hello, I'm James Phillips, and I do the History of the English Language podcast. However, I wanted to sort of take a step back from English and talk about something that's quite close to my heart. It's that time again in the year when we are all filled with cheer. I've been working on the episode 2 of the English language. However, my heart has been filled with Christmas spirit, and I wanted to share how people have celebrated Christmas in history around the world. So don't fret and worry, for the next episode will come in a hurry. But for now, just relax and enjoy, and if you're good, you may get a toy. So please enjoy these shorter form content and have a Merry Christmas. Origins of the English Christmas. Well, if you're smart, and I know you are, that's why you're listening to this podcast, you may guess the etymology of Christmas, Christmas. This pronunciation is almost 900 years old, being found in documents as the Old English Christemes in church records, which of course means the same thing as Christmas. However, earlier eras, the older Germanic name of Yule was used. Yule was an ancient festival of the early Germanic peoples, first documented in the Gothic calendar in around the 500s under the name Fruma Ulis in late December. But the first proper attestation of Yule is by the Anglo-Saxon writer, the Venerable Bede, who speaks about the month of Geola in December. Yule being a holiday, however, is first talked about in Norse poems, also known as Eddas. And in Edda about the Norwegian king Hakon the Good, it claims that when he converted to the Christian faith, he put the date of Yule to coincide with the date of Christmas in order to make conversions of the Norse easier. It is in fact the Yuletide festivals were 12 days long, full of feasting, dances, and the tradition of the Yule boar, which actually still survives today as the Yule ham in many countries. It seemed that the festival would have religious undertones about lunar events during the winter solstice, but besides this, it becomes incredibly hard to discern, as early Germanic peoples did not write much about themselves. As such, we need to base our research upon biased Roman or other foreign peoples' claims. Modern neo-pagan groups claim that all of Christmas began as the pagan Yule festival and it had become adopted by Christians. There is no evidence of this, as the birth of Jesus has been recorded around the time of year, long before it came into contact with Germanic or Celtic faiths. The name Yule, interestingly enough, is still used throughout Scandinavian and Finnic countries, such as the Norwegian Jol, the Danish Ul, but now that we know the origins of Western Christmas, let's see how it developed. Krampus, Santa's edgy cousin. Gone are the days that it was a scary rumor on the playgrounds, Europe's evil Santa that stained Christmas snow red with the blood of naughty children. Nowadays, everyone and their mother knows about Krampus. He's just like the spookier version of Santa, but who is he really? Well, with it being such a violent fairy tale, it should not surprise you to learn that it's German. Many people can tie him back to the old Germanic spirit of Yule. He is a child of the Norse goddess of the dead, Hela. As Christianity spread amongst the Germans, Krampus jumped over to the Christian celebration, much to the chagrin of the Catholic clergy, who wrote against the practices of traditions around him. Krampus would come to Germany and the Netherlands on December 5th. Kids would bring out their shoes to the side of the street, and Santa Claus would come and put presents out for the good ones, placing it in the shoes in the street. But for the bad kids, they would not get coal. Instead, Krampus would come with a birchen rod and beat them viciously. As the world changed, the tradition would as well. Now kids in the Netherlands and Germany lay out their shoes free of fear of St. Nicholas's better friend. Still, on this day, many people will dress up as the Christmas fiend and go and revel and drink. After all, it's still Germany. Fruitcake is another Christmas tradition that has made its way out throughout the centuries. The classic dessert is made and reviled the world over. The English fruitcake is not only an insult, but in fact a dessert popular in the United Kingdom. Like so much food in the United Kingdom, it's often joked about for being, in theory, disgusting. But what is it really? Fruitcake is an old dessert, first being seen in Egyptian pyramids among the pharaohs, the poor guys. Fruitcake would become a staple of the Roman legionary as well. The Roman fruitcake was made with barley, wheat, pomegranates, and nuts. It survived the fall of the Roman Empire. It is surprisingly tough, and went with the Crusaders as they went east, as they took their nasty-ass cake with them. In a quest to make it a little less vile, they added honey, dried fruits, and alcohol. It didn't work. In the 1400s, the alleged deliciousness of the fruitcake was seen as sinful, so the Pope banned cooking with sugar entirely. Germany, a leader of innovation, decided that they would do the impossible and make it worse. These sugar-free fruitcakes would use flour, oil, and water. Even when the ban was repealed, those poor Germans still use this recipe to this day. However, fruitcake, for many flaws, was surprisingly influential in the development of the Christmas traditions I do love. Presents and caroling. Back in the early modern and late medieval era, aristocrats would grant gifts to passerbys of lesser means. The nobles would often begin to mass-pack fruitcakes to hand out to their subjects. In fact, the fruitcake could survive months without being much difficulty to actually care for, which, of course, made it easier for it to survive the passages to the New World. Fruitcake became so popular in the colonial America when sugar was incredibly expensive, but slowly growing in accessibility. Candied fruits were the staple sweet of the average American. The fruitcake was incredibly easy to make, it survived long, and most importantly, in a time when sweets were far too expensive for the normal person, it was a beacon of sugar. Why do I hate fruitcake? Well, it just seems gross. I feel like it's one of those many old recipes like fried bear or, squirrel soup, which, as it was cheap, easy, and it could sit well, but it was made for a niche that doesn't really exist anymore. Sugar now is cheap. Too cheap, if you ask me. We have things like refrigerators to preserve foods. Sweets and baked goods are super easy to make. You can just grab a box. I guess fruitcakes are a fossil of an older era, without our modern luxuries. Or maybe it's just bad and I need to get a stick out of my ass and admit that fruitcake just isn't good. Another tradition of Christmas is Japan and KFC. Many people have a dish that's popular for Christmas. Earlier, I talked about the Yule ham and the earlier tradition of the Yule boar, but in Japan, different meats are on the menu for Christmas. In Christmas, people go to KFC and get massive barrels of fried chicken. How did this occur? Well, like so many strange things, it started around the 1970s. In 1974, Takashi Okawara, no relation to the castle owner, began to see an open market. There had been a market for KFC to be a Christmas food to replace the classical Christmas turkey, which was a rarity in Japan. Japan does not have much history of Christianity to form the old Christian traditions that are common throughout the rest of the world. However, after World War II, the Empire of Japan would fall and be occupied by the United States. During this time, American soldiers would have to do the dirty work of patrolling the country. As such, they brought over many American customs and media. If you've ever watched an American television show or comic book, then you know Christmas is at least somewhat an omnipresent part of American culture. In the 70s, the kids that had grown up on American media during the occupation had become young men and women working in Japan. Takeshi realized he had a market for American-style Christmas to these nostalgic men and women. He sold KFC party barrels as Christmas barrels. This would reach such support among the Japanese public that all of KFC Japan would adopt the Kentucky for Christmas marketing campaign. In fact, it was so amazingly successful that even now, KFC is tied up to the idea of Christmas in Japan and Asia in general. Even now, almost 50 years later, Christmas makes up 5% of all of KFC revenue in Japan. Here's another more strange story of the effects of Christmas on a very odd man. Baby, it's cold outside. Arguably one of the anthems of the modern secular Christmas. Nowadays, it's faced criticism for its arguably creepy lyrics. However, in 1950, Islamic scholar Sayyid Qutb would come up against the song. The Egyptian-born theologian would come into aggression against the song when he, as an exchange student, came to Greeley College in Colorado. Even before the incident, he had grown a distaste for the American way of life. According to him, people spent far too much time caring for their own lawns, and it was impossible to get a good haircut. But perhaps his largest grievance with the Americans was when, in a Christmas party at church, the song "Baby It's Cold Outside" had been playing on a gramophone. Syed would say, "The dance hall convulsed. The tunes on the gramophone were full of bounding feet and seductive legs," Kutub wrote. Later, arms circled waists, lips met lips, chests met chests. The atmosphere was full of passion. He was disgusted. After all, this was a church. The one who had put on the song was a Christian pastor. He was horrified at what he saw as the cultural degradation of the American and Western spirituality. In the eyes of a normal person, it's just a dance. But to him it was a sign. In their quest for freedom, they had become slaves to lust and desire. They had disrespected God and themselves through their lust. His views on American and Western culture had been poor to begin with, but after that Christmas, it was awful. He saw all of Western culture as an existential threat, simply leading to weakness and degeneracy. But, to be honest, why do we care? Well, after returning to Egypt with his education, he would work in the Islamist organization, the Muslim Brotherhood, trying to overthrow the President Nasser in the 1960s. While the attempt failed and he would be executed, his ideas would spread amongst the Middle East, influencing people like Osama bin Laden and Ruhollah Khomeini. It's not unreasonable to say that if Mr. Qutb had never gone to the dance in 1950, the Middle East would have been an entirely different place. To end our story of the history of Christmas, I want to talk about perhaps one of my favorite moments in all of the history of humanity, and one of the shining moments of our species. In 1914, the Great War had been in full swing. In the trenches across France and Belgium, Brits, Frenchmen, and Germans, who had been promised a swift victory, boasting about winning the war so swiftly they'd be home by Christmas, had become clear that that was only that, boasts. Soldiers had come to the brutalizations that the trenches would become their new home. I want you to imagine that you're in the Great War, just for a second, to really understand how insane this story was. It's dark. Gray clouds have long smothered the sun, and wet rain pours down on your little steel helmet, making plinks. It's just a little too big on your head, uncomfortable. You're trying to make yourself at least somewhat more comfortable in the muddy, freezing trench, holding your rifle close to you. You still have another 3 hours on your shift watching No Man's Land. It's Christmas Eve. Your mind comes to your wife and child. You were sure you would have been home by now. You were promised you would have been home by now. But you're stuck in a trench, slowly glowing, moldy in muck and grime. Something catches your interest around the German trench. Little fir trees dot the trench, flanked by barbed wire. Then you hear some noise coming from the German trenches. It doesn't let up, but it isn't the shout of artillerymen, nor the stream of insults common in the first days of the war. It was singing words in German, but the tune is familiar. You know they aren't. Is that Tannenbaum? You relax your hold on your rifle. The Boche aren't coming over the trench tonight, at least. As time passes, you even let yourself enjoy the music coming from the German trenches. You look over to the other Englishman next to you in your trench and begin to hum the tune of Silent Night. On your side of No Man's Land, more and more people join in. Voices from the trench join in a cacophony of noise, out of tune, out of sync, but alike in purpose and spirit. From across the trench you hear the music stop, and instead shouts occur. In a very strongly accented English you hear them shout, "Come over here." Your officer, a slightly older man in his mid-30s with a freshly waxed mustache, shouted back, "You come halfway, I come halfway." Awkwardly, he would climb up out of the trench and waddle over through the mud, stepping over barbed wire and dead bodies. Across the muck, a figure of a German man steps out of their trench. The two figures meet somewhere in the middle of No Man's Land, next to what had been a tree. Muffled talking is heard before you see him wave you over. You waddle over in the muck to join your officer speaking German with the German officer. German soldiers emerge from their side of the trench. They stumble over artillery craters. They don't look like very much. Just wearing gray rather than khaki. You hear one of them call out in broken English. You decide to strike up a conversation with him. He's about your age, and you share stories of your families at home. He reaches into his pocket for something. You take a step back, your hand reaching for the knife, until you see him pull out a small, crinkled square. A bit of chocolate. You take it and search for something. Finally, in your breast pocket, you feel a piece of candied fruit. Thankfully, it's not muddy, and you share this bit of candy. As Christmas Eve turns to Christmas Day, you look over from your trench and see some British and German soldiers playing a game of soccer in no man's land. You see people sharing gifts or singing Christmas songs in the rubble and the mud from the guns. People have taken this brief peace to bury soldiers in no man's land. You know that come tomorrow, all of it will be back to the war. But for now, just for a day and a half, you can be civil and treat your fellow man with kindness. That's what I love about Christmas. It's a simple idea and an old idea. In the coldest, darkest, most chilling part of the year, you should be kind to one another. And that's what I love, just in general. It's an excuse to be cheery, sappy, and kind without a hint of sarcasm or irony. A time of love without judgment or storm. So, show some kindness and like and subscribe. Have a Merry Christmas. Thank you for listening. Episode 2 of the English Language Podcast is coming. Don't worry.